Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Kyle and I are here to talk about supporting virtual research organizations that are trying to support and solve the world's allergy and infectious disease threats, and the challenge of responding to situations that call for rapid response in the face of meticulously specific authorization and accreditation processes for federal information systems, to wit, the NIST risk management framework. Before we get started, I do have some thank yous. First of all, to Michael Tartakovsky, the CIO of NIAID, for supporting our work. Also, Jeff Erickson, who runs the Identity and Access Management Services at the NIH Central IT Office. And I want to give a special thanks to Nathan Doers and Michael Brogan. Both of them have helped us pretty timely as we spun up some COVID-19 related research, and they've helped us troubleshooting our environment. So I really want to say thank you to them. We'll start with some context on what a virtual research organization, or VRO, is, and why the NIAID Discovery and Collaboration Platform, or NDCP, exists and what it does. A key part of our mission is enabled by being members of federated partnerships such as InCommon. And the crux is that the NIAID Discovery and Collaboration Platform is a federal information system that is governed by the NIST RMF, or the Risk Management Framework. And that handles accreditation and authorization, our accreditation and authorization. As we are all so acutely aware, from the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, infectious diseases pose threats that can rapidly emerge, and these threats are not constrained to geographical borders. Collaborative research teams must be able to form quickly across not just organizational boundaries, but international boundaries in response to these global health threats. So to facilitate that response, scientists need an IT platform that can bring all of their colleagues together into a virtual research organization, something that is spatially distributed, that hosts and shares research data for rapid, unconstrained collaboration. To that end, we've built this platform, such a system, and this work is really inspired by the authorization for research and, the authentication and authorization for research and collaboration, or ARC blueprint architecture. And so the ARC blueprint architecture has three key components to it. At its core is a proxy service, and this service handles security token translation. So when users log in, their identity and attributes are provided to all the applications that live within the platform. The next piece is a user registry, or a collaboration management system, and this handles user enrollment and access management. So the third piece is an attribute authority that provides supplemental identifiers and authorization data to all the downline applications that are offered to users of the VRO. So there are many, the joke is there are many like it, this one's mine. And so this one is ours, the NIAID Discovery and Collaboration Platform, in its current incarnation. The key technologies we use to enable this work are SATOSA, which is the token translation service, co-managed registry, which handles the user registration, and OpenLDAP, which is the authorization and policy repository. And we've tied into this system a wide variety of applications. Generally, they speak SAML, but we also have support for OAuth 2 and OIDC. So they range the gamut from document collaboration tools like SharePoint to translational research systems like RedCap to third-party web applications like Slack or AWS. In order to speed up the accreditation process, we're treating the VRO, the Federation Proxy, the User Registry, the Attribute Authority, as a general support system. It's the foundation that enables faster accreditation for new major applications as we bring them on. So even though the process of accreditation within the RMF isn't really agile, we can do a lot of the work building security controls and privacy controls that major applications then inherit from us. And that speeds up the accreditation process for those major applications. Kai will talk more about this in a few moments. The NDCP is built on the idea that we federate user authentication. And so we have all these relationships in order to facilitate that. The big one is the participation agreement NIH has signed with In Common. And so there are like 567 different institutions in the United States today who can collaborate with NIH scientists on NIAID projects, NIAID studies. But it's bigger than that. In Common itself is part of a federation of federations. And that's called EduGain. And that brings another 3,000 identity providers to us. Now, that doesn't mean that every person at some institution worldwide, every institution worldwide can log in. They still have to be invited and enrolled in our environment and given access to things. But it does mean that we don't have to maintain their credentials. They're credentialed by their sponsoring organization. That's how they access our environment. We don't actually maintain those usernames and passwords. So the process of accrediting these systems and these identities is a significant challenge in the face of the RMF. And so to discuss our efforts with that, I'm going to turn this over to Kyle.
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here. So Matthew talked about the NDCP and how it's a cloud-based service that allows virtual research organizations to come in, and we federate so that a bunch of research partners from a wide variety of institutions have a platform to collaborate on. But we are still a federal information system. And yesterday's discussion on Controlled Unclassified Information CUI, or the NIST 171 requirements, was a great lead in. And that's, NIST 171 is a pared down version of NIST 800-53, which is the full risk management framework. It's all about information assurance. It's all about the CIA triad, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And my typical view of an information assurance expert, the best thing I could come up with is a turtle, because they're very hardened, they're very slow, they're deliberate. We traditionally in IA and cybersecurity, we want the exquisite solution. We like to buy down risk as much as possible. And the most secure turtle is the turtle that pulls its legs and head inside the shell, just like the most secure computer is the one that's not plugged into anything else. But what Matthew's articulated just now is the speed of threat, or the speed of, as you saw with COVID-19, the outbreak happened very quickly, and you need a platform that can respond in a way that's faster than the traditional risk management framework process. Next slide, please, Matthew. So the security controls, we alluded to them yesterday. One of the speakers talked about the security controls in 171. Those are based on this document. And there are 17 different control families that are specified for every federal information system. And as one of the briefers said yesterday, and I'm going to repeat this, you hear the word security control, it's a spectrum of things, everything from, maybe it's a technical control where you have a block everyone, allow by exception configuration in your firewall, to a policy that says thou shalt run a configuration management program, to a training control that says users must be aware, of what a phishing attack looks like, and they must understand not to click on suspicious email. So it's an entire spectrum of items. And the 853 series works in tandem with the 863 series, which has to do with identity authentication, identity assurance levels, authentication assurance levels, and federation assurance levels. So if you're familiar with identity and authentication, it's things like, for identity, I need to provide maybe my fingerprints, maybe a birth certificate, maybe a driver's license to my institution before they trust who I am, who I say I am, and they give me a username and password as an authenticator. And higher levels of authentication, maybe a user password is not enough, and we have to give them multi-factor authentication. And then the federation authentication levels talks about how those assertions of identity move back and forth across the net and how encrypted they have to be. So getting into the control families, though, we have to account for all of these. And the ones I have highlighted are the ones where, when you're talking about 3,000 different identity providers, what's going to be weird and different than a normal federal information system. So these controls are kind of written from the paradigm of, I'm going to build my network and I'm living within the federal information space. But we are authenticating, or we are federating in a wide variety of participants from the international community, the educational community, the science and research community, and obviously there's going to be some weirdness. With access control, it's only kind of weird, but at the end of the day, we still have to manage an identity for that person, even though we're not technically implementing their login. And so we're still able to implement a lot of the access controls for access into our information space. But it's the identification and authorization place that gets really weird. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit on the next slide. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, there we go. So for those of you who are not familiar with the risk management framework, we got a slight preview of it yesterday. This is the image that comes straight out of the NIST guidance, and it's a continuous process. It's a long process. You have to build a system security plan. You have to get it assessed. You bring it to your authorizing official. He or she will approve it, and in the government, that's the only person that can accept information risk or network risk on behalf of the government for an information system. But what this translates in for people like me and Matthew, who are working right now to get our platform accredited, fully accredited, is that we have over 1,600 different accessible items in the National Institutes of Health's inheritance spreadsheet that we get from them as our overall governing body. So as you can see, this is a very labor-intensive process, and it's really that it's that turtle. It's going to be secure and hardened, and everything will be accounted for. And going through this process has been good because it's really forced us to ask hard questions about our own system that we might not have accounted for before. But it is not fast, and obviously, it's if something new comes up, this is not a rapid process. We've been working through the controls for 4 months now. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I've already alluded to, the speed of need is not equal to the level of assurance of security. So how do we start chipping away at making this more agile, if you will? So we have a couple of ideas working in tandem, and a couple ideas that are kind of on our landscape that have shaped the way we've approached this problem. First realization, the risk management framework, it's written from the based on what is your information, what level of information are you trying to protect, and then that drives a baseline. And it's not always achievable as written. And so the specific examples I'm going to use here is within the IA control family, we have controls for organizational users. So for us, that would be NIH and NIAID employees and contractors. And then there are our non-organizational users, which are the majority of users on our platform. And how do I guarantee that a researcher in Mali has the same identity credentials as a researcher in the US? And the answer is, I cannot. And so that gets to what the whole point of the risk management framework is being able to articulate risk. If you are deficient in a control, you have to try to implement a safeguard in another way, or come up with additional controls in other areas, which we call compensating controls. And you have to convince your authorizing official to understand the need for the deviation from the standard, which is mission-based, or I can't do this thing that you chartered me to do, which is federate and collaborate with the international community if we follow this. So we're going to do a different control instead. And then you have to build the trust with your authorizing official. One of the things we're working on right now, for example, is we cannot guarantee that every researcher coming in for authentication has multi-factor authentication from their home institutions. So we're working on a means to be able to provide a second token to every registered user who might not have one. Okay, next slide, please. So obviously, I kind of make a joke about the information assurance community, and that's, I as us, I'm one of us. So it's not that security is not important, but this bureaucratic, very slow, deliberate process just doesn't fit with whether it's the emergent threats of disease or cyber threats, is kind of what we're talking about here. It's the same kind of thing. Is needs happen quicker than our bureaucracy allows us to really take a look at it. So we have the Agile turtle, the Ninja turtle, and how do we grow from the tortoise into the turtle? And we haven't solved that yet, but we have some ideas on how we're doing it in our organization. And I've seen some of the things the Air Force is doing, which is a little bit more mature. But the biggest thing is your center of gravity is going to be your authorizing official if you're ever working with a government agency. And what is that person's level of risk tolerance? And sometimes the challenge becomes getting past the gatekeepers. So, if you have a lawyer is never going to advise people to take legal risk. Information assurance staffs are usually kind of the same, and it's not just the staff in our organization, but it's true in the Air Force as well. When I was an authorizing official, and I had an IA staff working for me, sometimes getting the mission owner past my staff to have that conversation with me as the decision maker to understand what the mission was, so I could weigh the risks. That became sometimes the challenge. So you need to cultivate a relationship with the authorizing official. And risk management, RMF is really slow without automated tools. Even the NIST guidance says you should need to automate the accreditation wherever possible. There are a number of vendors out there that have a number of different tools, but right now where our organization is in NIAD, it's all manual. And so we're going through Excel spreadsheets documenting all our controls, and that's taking a while. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is the way ahead? So for the reality that we're working with in NIAD, Matthew talked about breaking out the platform into the general support system, or the GSS. And the end users, the researchers, are going to be using applications within the GSS. So we are going through the very meticulous process to accredit and apply all the security controls in the GSS. Part of that is building the confidence and the dialogue with the authorizing official, so that when a new threat emerges, if that research community needs a new tool that we don't provide at this time, we have the level of confidence in the underlying system that we can get our authorizing official to approve what they call a contingent approval to operate. An ATO is an approval to operate. And so that allows for an operation of an IT system or service before the full RMF process is complete. And then we might have 3 months to get it done, 6 months to get it done, or whatever it is. But the reality is too, the way RMF works, you inherit controls from the system you're on. So once the GSS is accredited, the majority of the work is done for all those applications coming in, and that shortens the kill chain on getting things accredited. But what about the future? So industry obviously is not beholden to this process in the private sector. And obviously cybersecurity threats don't wait for staff meetings and staff packages to get to a approving official, authorizing official. And DevOps, if you're familiar, is as pervasive in the industry, where people can write code and test code and commit code in the same day. Netflix does it all the time. Banks do it. Some bank organizations do it. And it all depends on how you're organized. But obviously, if you have to, every time a piece of code changes, go through this entire bureaucratic process, you can't do DevOps. So no, we're not at a place yet where we're mature enough to do full DevOps. The Air Force is starting, but they have this thing called compliance as code. And so if you're familiar with how DevOps works, you have an automated pipeline that does all your security checks, your testing um, of the code as it's pushed. And so I know the Air Force was working on a means by which to take all this compliance stuff and also apply all the security controls in an automated way. And then the authorizing official actually accredits the pipeline so that anything coming through the automated pipeline is de facto approved. That is obviously a culture shift. That's not something, their solution doesn't quite work for us yet, but I have seen on GitHub some open source attempts to do, I think it's called GovCloud or GovReady attempts to get to compliance as code. So the last bullet I have is an open call for lessons shared and dialogue. We'll have our contact information, but if any of you are working on these same kinds of problems and you've seen in your institutions examples of getting to compliance as code or automated compliance, we would be very interested in some lessons learned. And with that, Matthew, I think the next slide, we close our presentation and open to questions and comments.
So we'll take, we're going to take questions through Zoom, or have the Whova chat up here too, if you want to use the session Q&A or chat. So if you use the raise hand feature in Zoom, I'll just keep an eye on it here. I do want to add that one of the more powerful things with a CI pipeline is being able to do not just RMF validation, so security validation, but the same technologies, the same tooling, the same tool chain can be used for compliance with things like FDA regulations, because a lot of the things that the NIST RMF asks you to do and is about reducing InfoSec risk, things like 21 CFR Part 11 are asking you to do to reduce health risk in research. So this tooling, we're building all this tooling to try to automate our risk management process for InfoSec. We're turning around and we're going to use the same technologies, the same techniques to get into compliance on the healthcare side, the health research side. So we have two questions in Whova. The first one is, was there any possible way to have this stood up as a non-federal system?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting discussion that we've been having round and round.
Yeah.
The issue is when the cloud platform is run by contractors employed by the federal institution, it becomes a federal information system. And because our cloud platform is not, it's not like an international site where the host country is letting us in. We're building this on behalf of NIAD and we're inviting others in. We have a responsibility to protect that research information. And there's another regulation, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, which talks about the kinds of information the federal government processes and then at what assurance level, or impact level. So every piece of information is identified under confidentiality. What's the impact if that's breached? Integrity, what's the impact of that if that's destroyed? Or availability, what's the impact if you can't get to the information? And there's high, moderate, and low. And so we have guidance on the kinds of information we have in the system and then therefore what rules apply.
Yeah, I think that's SP 800-60 has the security categorizations in it.
That sounds right.
So another question is, can you share any experiences with selling compensating controls? Yes, maybe.
Welp. We're in that process right now, so I'll let you know how it goes.
Yes, so one of our challenges again is surrounding federated identity. we have to come up with ways to meet some of the spirit of the rules because we can't meet the letter. For example, in a federated authentication exchange, I'm not doing in-person verification of someone's identity documents, and that's required by information or identity assurance level 2 in SB 863A. So we have to figure out other ways to do that identity proofing step if we can't get the information from the identity provider that says that they're doing it. So that's one example where we've come up with alternative ways of proofing someone, whether through, for example, government contractual mechanisms like the ERA Commons or the grant approval system. Sometimes there's other ways to get that or to meet that in-person identity validation requirement.
If I could add to that. So if I could add to that, so what the guidance says on a compensating control is, first of all, I have to articulate to the authorizing official why we need to do it, and it's usually based on our mission need. The second is we have to look in the catalog of controls to see if there's something else. There's a lot of controls that are specified that are not on the baselines that we're not required to do, but we can maybe add 2 or 3 more or a number more to increase the assurance level of the network. And then if those don't fit, then we can articulate additional things we do. So for the example of identity, what Matthew's saying, there's another control that talks about your user registration process. So we're going to talk and formally add checks to our user registration process that kind of buys down the risk of what we might be incurring in the unknown landscape of the identity providers. And I think we're getting the hook on time, so we have.
Yes.
I think they've yanked us to the edge of the stage.
So we've got one more quick question, and for those of you who cannot stay, you can click leave meeting, go to the agenda, and then join the next room. Who is your AO by position, affiliation, not name, and how well do they understand your researchers and domain science?
So our authorizing official is at NIAD. His name is Mr. Tartakovsky. From my view, he understands the researchers very well. NIAD is a smaller agency than the Air Force, where the authorizing official was at a much higher level than than what we experienced at base level. But Mr. Tartakovsky is very aware of the mission and the work we're doing.
Great, thank you so much, Matthew and Kyle.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
All right, everybody. So we're going to go to the next room, click leave meeting, and then join the next room in the agenda. Thanks.